Once upon a time in the Wild West, where tumbleweeds rolled across the dusty plains and saloon doors swung with a creaky charm, there lived a motley crew of outlaws. These fellas were as famous for their quick draw as they were for their questionable hygiene. Let me introduce you to the 5 of the deadliest, most notorious outlaws who ever roamed the Wild West. Grab your hat and let's ride into their legendary tales. Jesse James. Our story begins with Jesse James, the dapper desperado with a love for robbing banks and trains. Jesse was a bit like Robin Hood, except he forgot the part about giving the money to the poor. Born in Missouri, Jesse started his outlaw career with his brother Frank James, and a gang that was as rough and tough as a $2 steak. Jesse had a flair for the dramatic. When he wasn't robbing a bank, he was telling everyone he met about it. "Why rob a bank and keep it secret?" he would say. "Might as well enjoy the fame." Jesse had a charming smile that could melt butter, which made it even easier for him to rob folks blind. One of his most famous heists was the Great Northfield, Minnesota raid in 1876. Jesse and his gang planned to rob a bank in Northfield, Minnesota, thinking it would be a piece of cake. Well, it turned out to be more like a hot potato. The townspeople weren't having any of it. They fought back with everything they had, including pitchforks and a very angry cat. Jesse managed to escape, but not without a few bullet holes in his hat. He eventually made it back to Missouri, where he continued his outlaw ways until his demise. Jesse met his end in 1882 when one of his own gang members, Bob Ford, decided he'd rather cash in on the reward money than keep robbing banks. And just like that, the legendary life of Jesse James was over, proving that sometimes even the most smoothest talkers can't escape the long arm of the law, or a bullet to the back. Billy the Kid. Next up on our list is Billy the Kid, a youngster with a knack for causing trouble and a smile that could charm a rattlesnake. Billy was born Henry McCarty, but nobody called him that unless they wanted a swift kick to the shins. He had a reputation for being quick with a gun and quicker with a joke. Billy was said to have killed 21 men, but some folks say he might have been exaggerating. Kind of like when you claim you've caught the biggest fish in the lake. He got his start in crime-stealing horses, which is basically the Old West version of borrowing your friend's car without asking. Billy wasn't all about violence though. He had a soft spot for people in trouble, and some say he once gave a bandit a second chance to turn his life around, although that bandit ended up back in trouble almost immediately. One of Billy's most famous adventures was his daring escape from the Lincoln County Jail in New Mexico. Locked up and waiting for a date with the gallows, Billy decided that wasn't his style. He managed to slip out of his handcuffs and grab a gun, probably with a wink and a howdy to the guard on the way out. His escape was so smooth that it felt like he was in an old-timey movie, complete with a dramatic exit and a triumphant laugh. Billy's wild ride came to an end in 1881 when Sheriff Pat Garrett tracked him down. As the story goes, Pat sneaked up on Billy in the dark and shot him before he had a chance to reach for his gun. Some say Billy was eating a sandwich at the time, proving that even the most dangerous outlaws have to eat. And although Billy's life was short, it was certainly packed with excitement, making him a legend of the Wild West. Belle Starr. Now let's tip our hats to Belle Starr, the sassy and spirited bandit queen of the Wild West. Born Myra Mabel Shirley, Belle was the kind of woman who didn't take guff from anyone. She could shoot as well as any man, and was known to be a sharp dresser, always wearing fancy clothes, even while committing crimes. Belle had a love for outlaws, having married a couple of them. She was known for harboring fugitives and planning robberies with a flair that made her a legend. Unlike most outlaws, Belle was more interested in the drama of crime than the loot itself. It was said that she once robbed a bank just to see the look on the bank manager's face. Belle would even throw in a few high-spirited remarks while making her escape, leaving people to wonder if they'd just witnessed a bank robbery or a Broadway show. One of Belle's escapades involved stealing horses, a crime as popular as poker in the Wild West. She was arrested a few times, but always managed to charm her way out of serious trouble. Belle had a reputation for being able to talk her way out of anything, which is impressive considering she was usually caught red-handed. Her persuasive skills were so legendary that even the local judge couldn't help but admire her audacity. Sadly, Belle's reign ended in 1889 when she was ambushed and shot while riding home. Her murder remains a mystery, and many folks believe it was a rival or someone she had double-crossed. Despite her untimely end, Belle Starr remains a symbol of female rebellion in a world ruled by men and whiskey, proving that even in the Wild West, a woman could blaze her own trail. Butch Cassidy. Let's mosey on over to Butch Cassidy, the smiling outlaw with a heart of gold, or at least gold coins stolen from banks. Butch, born Robert Leroy Parker, was the kind of guy who would rob you and then help you find your wallet. He was the leader of the Wild Bunch, a gang of misfits and troublemakers who were as rowdy as they were clever. Butch was known for his sense of humor and his polite manner, always saying please and thank you while emptying a bank vault. He believed in robbing banks without violence, a principle that made him quite popular among the folks he wasn't robbing. One time, Butch walked into a bank, tipped his hat to the cashier and said, "Sorry to bother you, but we're going to need that money in the vault. And if you wouldn't mind, we'd prefer it in small bills." One of Butch's most famous heists was the Wilcox train robbery in Wyoming. Butch and his gang managed to blow up a safe, snag a pile of cash, and ride off into the sunset with big grins on their faces. The newspapers loved Butch, often painting him as a sort of hero rather than a villain. Butch Cassidy became so famous that even folks who'd never seen a train robbery knew his name. Butch's story took a twist when he and his partner, the Sundance Kid, fled to South America, trying to start a new life as gentlemen ranchers. The Wild West wasn't quite ready to let go of them, though, and they soon found themselves back in the business of robbing banks and trains. Legend has it that Butch and Sundance met their end in a shootout with the Bolivian army, but some folks say they survived and lived out their days in quiet anonymity. Either way, Butch Cassidy's legend lives on as the outlaw who could charm a cactus. Doc Holliday. Finally, we come to Doc Holliday, a dentist turned gambler turned gunslinger. Doc was a man of many talents, most of which involved cards and guns. Born John Henry Holliday, he earned his nickname Doc because he actually did practice dentistry, when he wasn't too busy playing poker or getting into shootouts. Doc was known for his quick wit and even quicker trigger finger. He became famous for his friendship with Wyatt Earp, and together they were involved in the legendary gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona. This shootout was less of a corral and more of a who can shoot the fastest contest, with Doc and Wyatt coming out on top. Doc was notorious for his dry sense of humor. He'd often quip that he was in the mortality business when asked about his profession. Despite suffering from tuberculosis, Doc lived life at full speed, gambling and gunfighting his way across the West. He once told a fellow gambler that he had a mind like a steel trap, and that was before he took all their money in a high-stakes poker game. One of Doc's favorite pastimes was calling people out for cheating at cards, which usually ended with him winning the pot, and sometimes the other guy's hat. Doc was a man who lived by his own rules and wasn't afraid to take risks, even if it meant facing down a group of angry cowboys. Doc Holliday passed away in 1887, succumbing to his illness in a Colorado hotel room. His last words were reportedly, "This is funny," proving that even in the face of death, Doc couldn't resist a good joke. His sharp wit and sharp shooting made him one of the Wild West's most colorful characters. The legend lives on. And so, dear readers, we come to the end of our tale of the Wild West's most notorious outlaws. Each of these figures left their mark on history with their daring escapades and unforgettable personalities. They were a colorful bunch, living in a time when the law was more of a suggestion than a rule, and when the line between hero and villain was as blurry as a desert mirage. Jesse James, Billy the Kid, Belle Starr, Butch Cassidy, and Doc Holliday remind us that the Wild West was a place of adventure and danger. These outlaws may have lived outside the law, but they sure knew how to make life interesting. Their stories became legends because they were larger than life, filled with daring heists and dramatic escapes. So the next time you find yourself in a dusty old saloon, remember the tales of these legendary outlaws. Raise a glass, tip your hat, and maybe try your luck at a game of cards. Just be sure to keep an eye out for any gunslingers who might want to relieve you of your hard-earned cash. After all, you never know when an outlaw might ride into town with a grin and a loaded six-shooter. Yeehaw!